If you told me 10 years ago, Kate, in 10 years, you'll have written 2 books, you'll be part of a successful podcast, you'll be speaking around the country, I just said, you are crazy. I could not see any of that. There was no way. And I'm sure some of your listeners feel that same way. I just couldn't see it. That's not who I was. But God said, that is who you are. And if you obey me and do what I'm calling you to do, you'll have a whole nother life, which is, part of the empty nest thing. We think there's nothing for us after that, mom's my only name. Well, it's not your only name.
On Life Repurposed, you'll find a blend of practical wisdom and biblical inspiration that's designed to help you navigate everyday life with faith, purpose, and hope. We focus on personal and spiritual growth with a range of topics from improving your relationships and discovering your purpose to setting and achieving goals, plus tools and resources to help you live your repurposed life. I'm your host, Michelle Rayburn, the author of books and Bible studies about finding hope in the trashy stuff of life. Kate Battistelli is living proof that God will use anyone if they're willing to be used. She's the author of the bestseller The God Dare and also Growing Great Kids. She's a mom to Grammy Award-winning artist Francesca Battistelli and Mimi to her 6 children. Kate experienced infertility, miscarriage, an abortion at 18, and 4 failed adoption attempts, which all wreaked havoc on her life. As a young actress in New York City, Kate had a life-changing experience, going from understudy to starring as Anna in the Broadway national tour of The King and I, opposite Yul Brynner for more than 1,000 performances. Kate and her husband laid down their careers in the Broadway theater in answer to their first God Dare, moving out of New York City and into the life of homeschooling and home business. She's married to her husband Mike and lives in Franklin, Tennessee. Here's my chat with Kate Battistelli. Today we're going to be talking about stepping out in faith. And when I asked Kate Battistelli about where she has seen God repurpose in her life, she had more examples than she could name. So Kate, let's start out talking about how you ended up on Broadway.
Oh boy, this is a big subject. And it's really interesting the way he just kind of takes you up out of obscurity and does something crazy. And just so the listeners know, I was not a Christian at the time. I was in my mid-20s, living in New York, wanting fame and fortune, wanting to win a Tony, all that stuff. Young actress. And, I hadn't done very much at that point, but I went for an audition for the understudy to the leading lady in a big national tour of The King and I, big Broadway tour starring Yul Brynner, who was the original king. And if those of you are young and don't know who he is, if you've ever seen the 10 Commandments, he played Pharaoh. He's the bald guy. He's famous for The King and I. He was in the original movie in the 50s and Broadway show back then and did lots of revivals. So this was one of the revivals. But he was a big star back then. I mean, you kind of stood in awe of Yul Brynner. So I went out for the understudy. I got cast and, also was in the chorus because I figure as an understudy, you never really think you're going to get the chance to go on, especially in a big part like that. I mean, it just doesn't happen. But I knew my part backward and forward because you have to know it.
Right.
I was being paid for. So, we went out on the road and about 2 months into the run of the show, the leading lady catches pneumonia. I mean, I walk in the theater door that night around 7:15 because back then, remember, this is the early 80s. No cell phones, no computers. If you're gone during the day, nobody can get a hold of you. So I didn't know this was coming. I walk in the theater at 7:15 for an 8:00 show. The stage manager sees me, runs and grabs me and says, "She's sick, you're on."
Oh my goodness.
And your life flashes before your eyes. This is a 3-hour show. I think I was not on stage maybe 25 minutes of the whole show.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, my life flashed before my eyes. I thought, okay, I have 45 minutes to get transformed into Mrs. Anna, the leading lady of the show with hoop skirts and hair. I mean, I just kind of sat there while they did all the stuff to me to make me presentable to do this role. So I went out. I just thought, you think in that moment, you learn very quickly that sometimes you have to do it afraid, which was something I really instilled in my daughter because, being in the music world and being on stage and performing. I mean, I told her, look, even if she was scared, I said, you committed to this. You're afraid, because I had learned that lesson the hard way. So anyway, I didn't die, which was good. I ended up doing the show for about 2 weeks because the leading lady was out with pneumonia. Well, about a month later, I get a call from one of the producers, and he says, Mr. Brenner has bought out the leading lady's 2-year contract, sent her back to New York, and he wants you in the role. Which, let me tell you, if anybody here knows the theater world, that does not happen. That never happens. They always get, somebody from New York or LA, a ringer, as you would say. So it was really life-changing, but so odd to have that happen so young. I mean, I like to think today, if that happened with Instagram and Facebook, it would be a big story because it's so odd. But I see a parallel because I didn't know the Lord, but that story, and toward the end of the show, they have the big "Shall We Dance" scene, and she and the king dance around the stage, and it's really a beautiful moment. But it's like he just pulled me out of obscurity to dance with the king. And I'm actually working on a book about intimacy that's going to parallel some of that. So just, and then the best thing about the show, about 6 months in, my husband joined as the associate conductor. And so I could see him in the orchestra pit, and he was really cute. So we got together, ended up getting married. We actually just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So,
congratulations.
Thank you. And then so we got married, still didn't know the Lord. This was after about 3 years that I was in the show, about 1,000 performances. So I had done this all over the place. And but then I left in that July. We got married in 1983. And we lived in New York. I still wanted to be famous. That was my goal in life. But about 9 months later, in March, we had a little side business, and we were working with this gal who was a born-again Jewish lady. And she kept inviting us to church over and over. She invited us, and we kept saying, no, we're good. We don't, we're fine. We don't need all that stuff. Well, she was relentless. And I always tell people, don't stop asking. Keep asking, because eventually they'll be embarrassed to say no, like we were. We just thought, let's get this. So we said, okay, we'll go to church. She said, come this Friday night. We've got a great gospel choir, because she knew we loved music. And I thought, okay, at the worst, we'll enjoy the music. So we get on the subway to take the F train, about a 45-minute drive to Jamaica, Queens, which is not where you go when you go to New York. It's not like, oh, let's go to Jamaica, Queens. Sure, it's nice, but it's typically not where you go. And the theater was a couple blocks away. It was an old theater that this church was in, a big church, like 1,000 people. I didn't know it was an all-black church, and a holiness church, which is very different from the typical church. Men and women are separated. Women wear skirts, no jewelry, makeup. It's very different from the typical American church. But that's where she took us. Sat us in the front row. We were the 3 white faces in an all-black church. And the pastor, I know she told him ahead of time, you need to get these 2. So we kind of felt like God was speaking to us. So when he gave the altar call at the end, our hands went up, we went to the front, and honestly, we've never looked back. So that was, from the king and I to that, our life has been so weird. Just so many God things that you just think, I don't even know where that came from. And then, so about a year later, so we got saved in 84. About a year later, had our daughter in 85. And about a year after that, we were still living in New York, young Christians, but still pursuing our careers. And after being Christians for a couple of years, we both started just getting this sense in our spirit that this was not the path God had for us. And we both sensed it. And, as young Christians, you don't always know what does this mean? So we got some prayer and confirmation, and God told us, lay it down. You just need to lay that life down, which makes no sense in the natural because we work exactly. My husband has a doctorate in conducting. So to work your whole life for something and then to lay it down, you just, okay, God. And we didn't know where we're going. It's kind of like Abraham. I like to liken it to that leave the land that you just leave everything, your family, your land, everything. Go to a land that I'll show you. I'm not going to tell you, but I'll show you. And you just obey. Abraham did, God counted it for righteousness. And I think it was a big test for us, but we obeyed, we followed, we were from New Jersey, moved back there, had a home business, started homeschooling back before it was cool. I mean, this back in the 80s, no one was homeschooling.
No.
I was a pioneer, but there were enough of us to, figure it out with no curriculum. So those homeschoolers out there, we didn't have anything, I think, but a Becca back then, maybe a couple others. So it was an interesting time. So we moved to Florida. That's where we raised our daughter, and the rest is history.
So that's so backwards from what people now are trying to pursue. If you think about it, and I'm sure, I mean, I graduated from high school in the 80s, so I know the 80s culture and know that people were pursuing fame then already too. But now it seems like if you're asking God to give you something big, people are looking for fame. And you did the opposite thing. So I'd love to know how that ties in then to what you speak on and talk about often, and you call it a God dare. I would love to know how you define a God dare.
Okay. But first, just about laying it down, what I've seen over the years is how I wanted fame and fortune for me. But the way he's taken that, because we laid that down, I see how he's taken it through our daughter. She doesn't really even, that's not the part that motivates her. It's the chance to worship, the chance to write songs that glorify the Lord, the people her life touches. So I see that, and it's like God saying, I couldn't use you. I can use you in a different way, but I can, because she makes my name famous, and then he makes her famous, which that's a whole thing. You just look at and go, oh. I sometimes look at my life and go, where did any of this come from? Like, you couldn't write this script. It's crazy. But
I love it when God does that.
I know. But I'll tell you how that all started. After she left home, I was in that empty nest place thinking, because we only had one child. So I had poured my life into her like moms do. She goes off to Nashville, starts doing records and all that stuff. And I'm sitting there going, well, now what? What am I supposed to do? What's going to fill my life? And we had homeschooled. By that time, there was a nice umbrella organization in Florida. We'd use them for homeschooling. And the gal that ran it called me one night and she said, Kate, we're getting ready to do our big 20th anniversary. Would you and your husband come and talk to our parents and tell them, what did you do to raise your daughter to not only, pursue her dream, but also stay true to the Lord? She's not fallen away. She's still pursuing God. And that's hard to do. A lot of times kids, move away, and it can kind of fall apart. So we said, sure, we would love to come. And as soon as I got off the phone, I looked at my husband and I said, what the heck did we do? Because
you just said yes.
I just said yes. Oh, sure, we'd love to come. But we sat down and talked about it, and we came up with 15 very specific things that we'd done. And we thought, okay, well, we weren't such bad parents. We can go talk about this. So we went a couple weeks later, gave our talk. It went great. Parents loved it. And we came home. And then the next morning I was praying and really thanking the Lord and praising him that it went well. The parents liked it. And right as I thanked him for those 15 things, I felt the Lord speak in my spirit. And he said, those are book chapters. And I wasn't a writer. I knew how to write. I'd always loved writing. I journaled, but I was not a writer. I wasn't an author. Let's put it that way. He's telling me to write a book, and I'm looking at God going, I didn't graduate from college. I went to 4 colleges in 2 years and didn't graduate from any of them. I like to tell people, but I got on the dean's list because I wanted to pursue theater. That was my heart. I didn't really care about, about college, which I don't suggest, but for me, that's how it was. And I thought, Lord, I can't do it. I'm not a parenting expert. I have no platform. I'll never get it published. It was so crazy but I just kept feeling it in my spirit. So I thought, all right, well, what do you do with this? I had no clue where to begin. And so I found out a friend of mine was a writing coach. I didn't know that was a thing, but I thought, well, it has the word writing in it. I'll call her and talk to her. So I said, can we meet for lunch? I've got to show you this idea. I met her, showed her the 15 things and said, tell me this is not a book. She looked at it and said, yes, it's a book. I'll get you started. You're going to write it and we'll get it published. And it's like, okay, now I have no excuse. So I had to do it, but I had the outline with I knew what the chapters were going to be. So I did. She got me started. I got it written. I had no agent, nothing at that time. There was still no real not much with the internet. It was 2012 when it came out. And it got it published by Creation House. We knew some of the people in that world, and they liked what they saw. So it was published. And after that, I was thinking, Lord, you dared me to write that book. I know you did. Because, he was testing me, which he will do. And I thought, I got to start looking at the Bible stories differently. I need to start going through and looking at these Bible heroes and see how God did that for them. And I saw it all over the place, like what I just said with Abraham, with so many of them, with Esther, dared her.
Yes.
She was willing to die. And I saw it all through scripture. And I thought, all right, I'm not the only one. This happens all over the place. So I define a God dare as just that crazy thing God drops in your spirit that you think, I mean, that's awesome, the Lord, but I'm not qualified. I'm not equipped. I'm too scared. I don't want to get out of my comfort zone. It's usually something he's asking you to do that's scary, that's outside your ability, which honestly is a good thing, because then we're relying on him. I like to say the impossible is God's comfort zone. That's where he can do the impossible. I can't. I mean, I can't begin to do that. But when he calls you, he equips you. So that's what I wrote a blog post called The God Dare. And one of the gals at this publishing company read it and said, Kate, you need to turn this into a book. All I could think of was, here we go again. Stuff, but I knew she was right. I had all the chapters again because I'd written this blog post with a lot of these Bible heroes. So I got that written. It took a little longer to get out. Came out in 2019 because I went through some really bad anxiety. Just a lot of stuff was going on in my life that I just couldn't get past to finish it. But I finally did. Came out in 2019, and people seem to respond to it, because it kind of gives them that little kick they need to listen, just step out. If it's not the Lord, you're going to know pretty quick, but don't be afraid, because he has so much more for us than we think. That's what I always tell people. I said, if you told me 10 years ago, Kate, in 10 years, you'll have written 2 books. You'll be part of a successful podcast. You'll be speaking around the country. I just said, you are crazy. I could not see any of that. There was no way. I'm sure some of your listeners feel that same way. I just couldn't see it. That's not who I was. But God said, that is who you are. And if you obey me and do what I'm calling you to do, you'll have a whole nother life, which is, part of the empty nest thing. We think there's nothing for us after that, mom's my only name. Well, it's not your only name. Right. God always has so much more, but we have to trust that he does. I had no idea, but now it's very fulfilling. Our daughter's given us 6 kids, which is amazing. I wanted a huge family, but, God had a different idea. So life has been, for the most part, I mean, we all have ups and downs and tough things that happen, but just to see what he's done, just because I said yes to one thing,
yes,
how it works.
I like how you shared that you've had some ups and downs along the way, because a lot of people have the perception that when you decide to write a book and God's called you to do it, that it's just going to be all sunshine and rainbows and just like an easy path. And you said that you had to work through anxiety for that book to come out in God's timing. So what would you say to the listener who's here at the table with us who says, well, God's given me this thing, but anxiety or something like it is standing in the way?
Well, real anxiety, I mean, I get that. That's going to take prayer and, a lot of things to get through. But if you're just sitting there going, I think I'm supposed to write this, I don't know, just start writing. That would be just start doing whatever that thing is, that you get that sense you're supposed to be doing it, but you're not doing it. Just start. We all start with a blank page. That's intimidating. Yeah. I'm working on a 3rd book, and we all start with that. We all start with thinking, this is terrible. No one will read it. It stinks. I'm a bad writer. I've gone through all of that. I mean, just ask my husband. I'm constantly saying, no, there's, I have no right to write. And God says, yes, you do. Just shut up and write. So, but anxiety is a tough one. And that was part of why I couldn't get this book done. But also God dared me to put some of my life story in there that I did not want to put in there. The ugly life that I had to take his dare and do it, because I was very afraid. And I'll tell listeners what it was. I got pregnant at 18, and this is back in the 70s. Abortion was not, it became legal, but it was not something you celebrated. Like they celebrate today, they hold their signs at the protests, and they just shout it out like it's a good thing. But I got pregnant at 18. I didn't know what to do. I went to Planned Parenthood. I knew I couldn't tell my family. So I went to Planned Parenthood to say, well, what do I do? And the lady said, well, do you want to have a baby or not? Which is interesting. She acknowledged it was a baby. And I said, no. She said, I lived in New Jersey at the time. She said, well, go to New York. Here's where you go. So I went to New York, had an abortion, basically put it out of my mind. I told no one. I mean, the boyfriend at the time, he knew, but I told no one in my life till I got married. I told my husband. I didn't tell my daughter till a few years ago. And so for me, it was so guilt-ridden and shame-filled, which from that generation, typically it is. But I think even all generations, if you really examine it, if it's not causing guilt and shame now, it will eventually, I think. But I knew I got saved at 29, and I knew the Lord forgave me, but I couldn't forgive myself. And I was just terrified to tell anyone. I thought, what are they going to think of me? But I was on a podcast, and the gal on the podcast she talked about her abortions, and just so not flippantly, but just she could do it easily. And I, gosh, you can do that. I never imagined that I could, but the Lord was saying, you need to put that in the book. And it was pretty clear it wasn't going to come out till I did. So it's chapter 4. And I always tell people, if you still like me after you read chapter 4, then we're good. But all of my story is in the book, and the God Dare. And I always associate it with some Bible character. And this chapter, I thought, well, who do I associate it with? Well, I picked the woman who's accused of adultery, and they're going to stone her, and Jesus, doesn't let them. And even though I've never committed adultery, it was sexual sin, so I compared it to her, and it's a pretty moving chapter, but, and that's probably the chapter I get the most comments from women on, that it's been helpful for them, because it reminds us that Jesus doesn't remember our sins. They're in the sea of forgetfulness. He's not sitting there going, well, you had an abortion, so I can't use you. But so often we use that God, you can't use me. I messed up too much. I did something you can't forgive, which is a lie. That's what the enemy wants to tell us. But once you're able to release that thing, that guilt and shame, I can talk about it easily now. It's not something I'm ever proud of. If there's one thing I could change in my life, it would be that. But I can't, but there's a lot of women. It's 1 out of 3 or 4. So I know some of your listeners have had an abortion that are maybe struggling with it. But if you know Jesus, if you've repented, don't give it another thought in terms of him using it against you. He never will, and let that guilt and shame come off. Just pass that thing out,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because there are times where we look back at our past and we think God can't use us. He's nudging us in a direction, and we think we can't go there because of something we're trying to cover up. And I love that more and more writers are being vulnerable and sharing stories that demonstrate God's grace, that demonstrate love and remove that shame. And that's where I see other people's lives changing because you're sharing those stories. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. I mean, nobody's perfect,
right.
Look like, right. They've done all these things. It's like, we're all sinners saved by grace,
Yes. Yeah. For me, my story is one of being a Pharisee in my 20s, and how God has really uprooted that judgy kind of, just the way I treated people. And so we all have something that could have it did hold me back for quite a few years. And I had to get vulnerable about being a Pharisee. And when you look in people's eyes when you're speaking, you've probably experienced that, where you see the people who have experienced something similar, and you can see the healing begin to take place. For me, the biggest God dare was actually leaving my career. So if I look back at your story, it started when you left, well, maybe even before that, but when you left Broadway, that's a huge thing. I had built up quite a dream of what my career was going to be. And then suddenly, while I was pregnant, God told me you're going to leave this career and you're going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I thought, that's crazy. So that's probably the response that some of our listeners have when God gives them a God dare is, God, you're crazy. So how do you get past that then when you're struggling with that and you're thinking you must have heard him wrong?
We all think that. I mean, you just got to pray, let the Holy Spirit reveal it to you, because he will. If he's guiding you, then don't be afraid to take the steps, if it is leave your career or start this new career or
right.
start that business you've been, or let go of that business. The main thing for me is obedience. We have to obey, because if we don't, then he really can't use us. Obedience is the key. Praying to the Holy Spirit. Well, what do you have for me? Spending time in the Word, because we will not hear him if we don't spend time with him. Spending time just sitting in his presence, listening to music, just sometimes just letting him speak. If we could just shut up long enough, we can hear him, and I put myself in that too. But listen and obey what he's telling you to do. Because if it's not God, I think you're going to know pretty quickly. That doesn't mean there won't be obstacles, because there will. Write that first book, it was just a chore. It was hard to do, and I could have just given up. But I'm so glad I didn't, because that led to the God Dare, which is leading to the next book. It's one after another, just keeps coming, if that's what God wants. But I've also told him, we have to hold things lightly in our hands.
Yes.
I can't say, God wants my house or wants me to sell everything and move, or won't, says you're not supposed to write anymore. You're supposed to go do this. I think if we are truly following the Lord, we're not going to care where he puts us as long as we're serving him. So holding all those things very lightly, I think, is critical for us to be able to do his will, to not be afraid, to just not be afraid, just follow him.
I think when we say I'll never, it almost dares God to prove that I will.
Right.
Because I've said I'll never move here, and I lived there. I'll never leave this community. I did,
I call them 90-degree turns. You're going one direction and you think it's great. God says, nope, turn left. Go this way. And like, okay, God, I guess we're turning left. And he'll do that. I don't know if it's to test us or just that's the path of our life, that we're supposed to go a certain way for a certain time for those lessons. And then he moves us out of that. Not always, but for many of us, that's often the way I think he works.
Yeah, rather than testing, for me, it feels like it was me learning to trust him, because I thought I was capable, smart, I could plan my own life. And then when I sensed those strong, like the 90-degree turns, it didn't make sense to me. And so it was learning each time to trust him that he had a better plan than I could come up with, which in my arrogance seems so surprising to me.
I think he just loves to mess with our plans. To say, okay, well, if you'd asked me, I'd have told you that's not what you're supposed to do, because we're capable. We're capable of doing things, and God, well, I'm good at this, so I'm going to do that. But he might be saying, you're good at that, and then you don't need me. So I'm going to take you to something you're not necessarily good at, because you'll depend on me. We can do anything in our own strength, but that's our own strength.
What excuses have you experienced or seen others have when they've sensed God has put a dream on their heart? And like, what excuses do they give for not pursuing it?
I think laziness is a big one, or comfort. We have so much in America, it's so easy to get wrapped up in so many things. And like you said, in pursuing it in your own strength. I think that's a big one. I think I hear a lot of, I'm just too old. I was in my 50s when I started. I'm in my 60s now. Of anybody that's too old, it's me. But I'm not. The Lord, he's not letting me go. He's saying, you just keep going until he stops me. So I'm too old is a big one. I'm too young. But, the Bible, there's lots of young heroes in there. And then I've messed up too much, or God doesn't even know who I am. He doesn't know I exist. He's working over there. He's not working with me, which is a lie from the pit of hell. All of these lies. If God if only if he's speaking, do you want to move? If he's not speaking, stay where you are, because God is all about seasons. He's all about timing. His timing is perfect. And there are times we have to wait. I'm in a waiting season right now that's driving me crazy. And I have to go, okay, Lord, I'm anxious for nothing. Your joy is my strength. But I have to remind myself, because if I just go with what I want, it's never going to work. But it's learning to trust when nothing's happening. That's a hard place.
Yeah. What are some of the questions you ask him when you're seeking him, when you're wondering, is this a dream he's put on my heart? Or if this is a waiting season, I'd love to just know some of the questions you ask God.
Yeah. I think I'm learning to not ask as much, to just trust when there's something that I know there's a decision that needs to be made. Like, just different things. You know how publishing is. Are they going to pick up my book? And then you just have to wait to publishing, wait and wait and wait. So you're just sitting there and I'm going, okay, God, what do I do? Do I keep working on this while I'm waiting? Do I work on something different? It's hard to really question God, just because if we're waiting, there's a reason. He's got us there. It's like, he took Jesus into the desert. He's going to take us there. And I think that's a great test that the Lord uses. How willing are we? How willing are we to sit with him, to keep pursuing him, even when it's not turning out like we like?
Yeah.
There have been many things in my life that did not turn out how I wanted them, but I've continued to pursue him because he's worth it. No matter what, God is worth it. He's worth the wait, and I think it's really just a way to mature us, because there are a lot of immature Christians out there who just want to do it on their own. They're impatient. Today, everything's bite-sized, these little bits constantly on social media, which I suggest not spending much time on that. But we're just, everything, we are in such a hurry, and we just need to, that's the hardest thing, I think, for many in every generation, but particularly the youngers, is just to sit still, to not be doing anything. It's nearly impossible. So, let me just check Instagram. It's like, no, put it in another room in the house. Go sit with the Lord. Just go pray or listen to worship music or whatever. But we can't be in a hurry, because he's not.
God gave us a dare 18 years ago when he called my husband into full-time camp ministry. And I remember a question I asked him a few times was, is this a sign? Because I remember shortly after making that decision, knowing our finances were going to change drastically going into ministry, and our car broke down and it was an expensive repair. And I asked God, is this a sign that we shouldn't be doing this?
Yeah.
And, it was clearly, like what you're saying, a sign we were supposed to be trusting him. But I asked those questions because I wondered, are you sending these signs because we should have said no? And so those are the kinds of conversations I have with God often.
Yeah. Yeah, I have those too. I'm like, God, you say, I've never seen the righteous forsaken or their children baking bread. I'm going, well, am I righteous? There's times you do feel forsaken. It's like, God, I'm just not hearing a thing. But that's where intimacy is born. That's where, when you really start listening and pressing in, even when you don't hear anything, that's the time. That's where he's going to grow us. It is never easy. It can last 6 months. It can last 3 years. You just don't know. But it's being faithful in that. And that's hard. That's hard to do.
Yes. Yes.
He said the road is narrow. There are few who find it. So I like to ask ladies, are you willing to be one of the few? I want to be one of the few. I don't know if I am yet, but I want to be.
Listener who's out there, in her book, Kate throws back the curtain and asks this question: what if we say yes? And listener, that might be a little bit scary for you. And so I want you to think about fear and self-doubt and some of the things that might come to mind. Kate, what's the first step somebody takes after they've prayed about it and they sense God saying yes to this and they're saying yes? What's their next step?
Well, I think you need to kind of have a roadmap of what does it involve. What do I need to do? What are the things I need to put in place to do this? There's got to be a 1, 2, 3 for everything. How do I get prepared? How do I get ready? With writing, like, well, what do I do next? Do I just start writing? Do I try to do this or that? So kind of coming up with a simple roadmap that you're willing to have the Lord change. You got your map and he's saying, no, it's over here. You're in the wrong spot. But I would say just that, just start whatever it is, just start doing it. If it's the time to not start, you're going to miss it. And I'll tell you one story quickly. If your listeners have ever heard of Reinhard Bonnke, he was a huge evangelist in South Africa. He was like the Billy Graham in Africa. Millions came into the kingdom because of him. So one day, though, he heard the Lord say to him, "You are not my first choice. You are my third choice."
Mm.
And I mean, all I can ever think of is those other two guys when they're standing before the Lord and he says, "Look what I had for you. Look what you turned down." So I just encourage any listener that's thinking that's, in that space, don't turn it down, because if you don't do it, he's going to get somebody else to do it. God will have his way. And I mean, it gives me chills when I talk about Reinhard Bonnke, because I think, man, I wouldn't want the Lord to tell me that, but at the same time, it would be good. Humility is a really good thing. So just don't be afraid to do it. If you fall on your face, who cares? Just get back up and start again, because somebody's going to do that, and he's chosen you to do it. So just don't be afraid. Step out.
What stories are you hearing from people now who have read The God Dare and stepped out? Are you getting some feedback from people who have really taken that message to heart?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, more than anything, they'll say, "This is really kind of kicking me in the butt to do that thing." I think it more often I get that it's motivating me, but sometimes it's, yeah, you know what? I didn't know how to do it, but I've started, and God's putting it together. So obedience, he's going to move. When you obey, he'll step with you. If he calls you to do it, he's going to equip you. So don't be afraid to just go. Keep him always leading in the front and follow. It's going to be step by step. Typically it's not going to happen all at once, but you'll know, as you, just like Abraham, just follow me. That's typically what the Lord says. Just follow me. I've already got it figured out. You just step by step. Don't try to get ahead of yourself.
You talked about Abraham, and for him to follow God, he did have to leave something behind. He had to leave behind his old country, people that he knew. What has God asked you to leave behind as you've pursued him full on like this?
Pride, leave that behind, which is a good one. I'm not very successful, but I'm trying all the time. Just opinions of others. I've got some family members that don't talk to me. It's like, well, I have to, Jesus said, your family's going to hate you. Well, not all of them, but so leaving that behind and saying, I'm going to pursue you, Lord. I don't care what other people think. I really don't. There's a great book or title years ago that said, "What you think of me is none of my business." And I love that, because it's like, I'm going to do what God's called me to do. It doesn't matter. We have to follow him. It's a very narrow road. So those are probably the biggest. I mean, I'm not hearing a lot of that right now, because I think I am doing what he's calling me to do. But if that stops, I want to be able to hear him say, put the brakes on. You're going a different way.
I had to change how I use my time in order to pursue the writing that I do. That meant some of my hobbies changed. Yeah. Because if you're going to pursue, there's no room for everything. So family is very important to me. So I didn't want to have that be something that fell at the bottom of the list. But quilting, I just released it. I could let that go. So as you think about where God's calling you next, what do you have that scares you when you think about it? Because we're talking about this, God's daring us.
I think the biggest thing I'm scared of, and as a writer, it's just, is this next thing going to be good? Is really the Lord? Am I going to be able to figure it all out? Will I be able to hear? Am I willing to give up? Because that was good. I wasn't thinking about that. The things you have to give up. I've had to give up some hobbies. I used to love to knit, different things. It's like, I don't have time for any of that. Another big one to give up is, are you willing to give up social media? At least cut it way back. If you're I hate getting that little notification on my phone. You spent 30% more on, online than you did last week. I'm like, oh, forgive me, Lord. But I mean, sometimes we need to be on our phones, but we all waste so much time. If we put that time into prayer or reading the word, how the world would change.
I was thinking about that today because when you're in any kind of space where, like, even just podcasting, this is not an income producing venture for me. I just am passionate about podcasting. So whether it's something that produces income, like writing, a little income,
A little bit.
or something that's, speaking a message, it all requires some way of getting the word out. And there's this fine line between, I don't want to be famous, but I have to somehow get the word out, or I'm doing this for, you've maybe heard people say, I do this for an audience of one, and if it's just me and God, well, that's all nice in, theory, but we still have to get the word out. So I don't know if you felt that tension too.
Oh, yeah. Building your platform. You have a certain number. They won't look at you unless you have a certain number of subscribers or Instagram followers. I'm always trying to build my Instagram because I know that's important. But I'm just like, I hate having to think of ways just to get followers. And more, the Lord's just like, just let me handle it. Just I'm telling you to do. I'll build it as I build it. But yeah, that's the weird dichotomy between knowing you're supposed to do it and really just want to do it in obscurity without all that, but having to constantly promote yourself. I hate that.
Yeah, me too.
Having to promote myself. It's like, I won't even say I'm a writer unless my husband says it, or, I have trouble talking about that. He's like Mr. Salesman.
I think that's important for the listener out there to know that, first off, if God gives you a dream, it's not going to just be handed to you. There's going to be hard work, whatever it is. But then on the other side of it, we maybe don't want to work so hard that we're trying to outrun God and not leave some space for him to do that miraculous work he does when we're not trying so hard. Yeah. So I love that you're landing in the middle in that space there. How would you encourage then somebody who is wondering, like, this seems so hard, but I sense God calling me to do it. Yeah. We've talked about the next step. How do you get past that final hurdle then of just doing it?
Yeah. It will be hard, and there is a price to pay. Like you said, you had to give up some of the hobbies that you like. Sometimes you have to give up some friends, some of those naysayers in your life that are, well, you're not good enough. You're not equipped. And there are plenty of them that will tell us that. So sometimes it's just getting rid of that, getting rid of the distractions. Imagine like an Olympic swimmer. They have to practice all the time to get good enough to be in the race. So we have to get out there and just start doing whatever it is. And if you need some training or, whatever you want to do want to do anything, start a business and whatever, there's a zillion YouTube videos, there's plenty of teaching you can get to help you with that. But really just start moving. Just take that. What the first step is. Just do the first one, and the next one will come. The doors will start to open. So really just don't be afraid to jump in, Bungee jump with God, I call it.
Yes. Is that the title for your next book? Bungee jumping with God?
That would be a good one.
That's a good follow-up to the God Dare.
Truly it is.
Speaking of the God Dare, your daughter, Francesca Battistelli, wrote the foreword, a really sweet foreword there. And I wondered, has she taken this dare?
Of her life. Yeah. I just look at her life. She really has, just in I don't know, just everything. And then having 6 kids and homeschooling them on they have a little farm with chickens and garden. And I would not have seen that for her, but to see how she's just plunged in, and all the things that she does are just one huge dare to me. She's just so prolific in so many ways, but at the same time loves being home, loves being a mom, loves doing all those things. More of that now with 6 kids from 12 down to 1.5. So still doing some writing and touring and stuff, but and life changes over time. But yeah, she's never been afraid to take the next step.
I love that she introduces the dare in your book, just because that's a beautiful collaboration between you. Speaking of your book, where can people find it? Where can they connect with you?
Well, all the, Amazon, typically all the places that you normally get books. They can connect with me on Facebook, not Amazon, Instagram, just feels like Amazon.
It does.
Twitter, all those places. And I'm always just Kate Battistelli. So anywhere they go, that's where they'll find me. And that would be wonderful. KateBattistelli.com.
I will link to that in the show notes. And you told me before we started recording that you do have a freebie people can get there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you can get the Franny's introduction and the first 3 chapters of the book if you text Goddare, Goddare, like one word, to 44144. So it just give you a, get a sample of the book before you decide you want to buy it, which I hope you will, but you may go, this isn't for me.
I'm going to be listening to the audio version because I go out for a walk. So you'll be in my headphones.
Wonderful.
I love getting the audible versions of things. Kate, as we wrap up today, what word would you like to leave with the listener?
Well, when the Lord moves on you, when you really sense that it's him, give in and go. Because if he's calling you to it, even if it's scary, it's going to be so much better than what you have. Obedience is the key to everything. And I think if you're willing to step out and just do that thing, he'll honor that. He'll honor it. So just don't be afraid, because that's the biggest hurdle people have. Don't be afraid.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your heart with us today. I've so appreciated your time, Kate.
I'm so glad you had me, Michelle. Thank you.
Friends, I want to ask you what your big dream is. What is God daring you to do? I hope that this discussion with Kate got the wheels rolling a little bit. Maybe you're thinking about what is that thing you keep pushing aside and God keeps bringing up and nudging you to do. Maybe there's something that's not as big as a drastic change. Like I talked about leaving a career. Kate talked about leaving Broadway, and then she talked about making the decision to write a book. Maybe yours is very different from that. That's cool, because God calls us all to different things. So I'm wondering, what is he daring you to do? I'm going to be creating a worksheet to go along with this episode. It goes out to my email list, and then after that goes on Patreon for Patreon subscribers. It's going to be a worksheet to help you think through dreaming just a little bit and asking God, what dream do you have for me? So if you're looking for that brainstorming sheet, that's going to be available. You're going to find the links that I talked about, Kate's website, her book, all of that in the show notes for this episode at michellerayburn.com/166. So I will have that there. You can find out more about that worksheet as well. So I'm just challenging you today as we leave to think about, what is God daring you to do? Thank you so much for listening today. I will see you next week with another episode. You've been listening to Life Repurposed. If you'd like bonus resources sent to your inbox each week, be sure to sign up at michellerayburn.com.